Welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to today's webinar. We offer wishes of a good afternoon, a good morning, a good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Guido Hirscher. I'm the Vice President of the University of Haifa, and today I'm moderating the conversation from Haifa. We are deeply appreciative that you've joined us for today's conversation. We recognize that this is a complex, not easy topic that, quite frankly, most would rather go on with their day and not pause. And yet, everyone on this call today has made the decision to pause, possibly to learn, to reflect, and we want to appreciate that. The name of this conversation, this webinar, is Healing from Within, Rebuilding Israel's Social Fabric After October 7th. And we're joined by Dr. Ron Kuttner, a distinguished expert in peace and conflict management from the University of Haifa. I do want to note that healing from within, when connected to October 7th, is not something that you're going to see often in the news. In other words, what we're bringing to you today is, in a sense, a transitional conversation, possibly from deep sorrow, horrific loss, and as we move into a future that we truly hope is anchored in healing. And that is a very intentional decision that we made in determining the language for this conversation. Israel today faces profound internal divisions that threaten its social fabric and its national resilience. The aftermath of October 7th has intensified pre-existing fractures between religious and secular communities, which we saw prior to October 7th, but it's now amplified. And also those rifts between those with differing democratic visions. And I think, needless to say, but we're going to say it because we're putting it out on the table today, the schisms between Jews and Arab citizens here in Israel. This fragmentation not only weakens Israeli society from within, but it also impacts critical national priorities, many of which will be raised today, including strategies for ending the war and securing the safe return of hostages. Dr. Kuttner leads the University of Haifa's International Graduate Program in Peace and Conflict Management Studies. He also works with organizations and community centers across Israel to create more productive conversations between divided groups. His impressive background includes teaching at Creighton University in the US and serving as a visiting scholar at the Harvard Law School, where he helped redesign and teach Harvard Law School's mediation course. Now, what makes this conversation particularly meaningful is that it aligns perfectly with who we are as a university. The University of Haifa serves one of Israel's most diverse student populations in the country's most multicultural city. To put some numbers on that, 50% of our student body are first-generation students, and 40% are Arab Israelis. And so we are embedded and we are anchored in a community where Jewish and Arab students study side by side, where secular and religious perspectives meet daily on campus, in our classrooms, in our laboratories, in the coffee shops. This isn't just an academic talking point. It's our lived reality. This is what we do. We pride ourselves as a beacon of hope and coexistence in northern Israel. We've worked tirelessly to ensure not just the physical safety and mental health of our students, but to expand our long-time role as a growth engine in our city and across the north. The laboratories and researchers and doctors and centers across our university campuses hold within them a remarkable amount of wisdom, of data-driven understanding and discovery about how communities can bridge divides and find common ground. This unique positioning, being both community-rooted and academically rigorous, it enables us to lead in developing the next generation of conflict transformation specialists. because we are going to need them. When you're training peacemakers and mediators in an environment where diversity isn't theoretical, but practical, where coexistence isn't aspirational, but it's operational, that means that you're preparing them for the real world in ways that few institutions, colleges, and universities in Israel can offer. It's what makes us unique. Before we begin, I do want to inform our listeners, here's some housekeeping, that we will have a dedicated questions and answers section at the end of the webinar, okay? So please leave any questions you have for Dr. Kuttner in the questions and answer box if you are joining us on Zoom, or in the comments section if you're tuning in live on Facebook, which I understand is populating right now as well. Finally, if you are able to give back to University of Haifa at this time, in other words, if you're moved, intrigued, compelled by this conversation, there are ways that you can support us. We will be providing a website in the chat section, or by scanning the QR codes on the top right of your screens. With your support, you can help us continue our vital work in peace and conflict management, fostering dialogues across communities where many are quite nervous and apprehensive to do so. And together, we are going to build a more cohesive Israeli society. Now let's go ahead and transition to Dr. Ron Kuttner, who is with us. And before we launch in, Dr. Kuttner, to some quite meaty questions, I wanted to just take a moment and recognize that those joining us today their temperatures may be rising as we introduce this topic. Certain phrases, certain political opinions could trigger certain feelings, and yet at the same time, that's actually not the point of this conversation. So my first informal question to you is, what advice do you offer our speakers, our participants that are joining us today that would help them maximize this experience?
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gideon. Thank you very much for this introduction, very welcoming introduction. And by welcoming, I mean that it's kind of giving us the legitimacy to be present with the sorrow, with the pain, with the doubts that we may have, the many questions that we have. I think we have more questions than answers. I hope we are able to be courageous enough to be with our questions. So I would say, let us be with our questions. Let us suspend judgment. Let us try to come in with a mindset where we reserve judgment and try to shy away from discussion or a heated political discussion in which we take side, saying who's right and who's wrong. I think part of what I would like to say is that we need to be able to observe and embrace and be mindful of the complexities at hand. And in order to do that, we need to kind of take a step back from passionate advocacy towards one side or another. I have no intention to get us there. I hope we will not get there. Only last week I was hosting a facilitated a discussion among 15 army members, friends since the age of 18, and now they're 65 or 66. They called me in saying, we can't handle our relationship anymore. And, friends coming out of the army, what kind of bonding that is. They say, we're unable to kind of maintain and contain our relationships. Do come and help us. We were sitting there for 3 hours. There were two people at the end that were a bit frustrated, saying, we didn't say anything about why Bibi is good or Bibi is bad. I said, that's not the point. All the rest, we're hugging each other at tears, and they know that they have what it takes to deal and to manage and contain and to engage constructively with these difficult issues. And I think that's more important.
Okay. Well, thank you for that offering. And I do want to say that for some, it's going to be replacing the hard drive and really thinking differently. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to dive in now to the nitty gritty, and we're going to start with Ron, with Preexisting divides. as I mentioned earlier, even before October 7th, Israel was experiencing significant social fractures. Can you give us a map a bit of how would you characterize these divides? What were they, and how's the trauma of October 7th and the subsequent war intensified those divides?
Yeah. The demons are out of the closet. For many years, our main concern was the fragmentation with our Arab citizens, which is a huge issue that needs to be addressed and which need to continue and address it. And at the same time, there was some very fine means by which we were managing the internal tensions of our identity as a Jewish and democratic state. Part of the identity of Israel as a state being both Jewish and democratic. Many people have been saying for years that, that doesn't work together. No, I think we did a pretty good job with finding ways to deal with it. But probably from a conflict specialist standpoint, I would say maybe we have repressed a little bit some of the questions that come with it that need to be surfaced. For me, as an expert in the field, I'm here to help surface conflicts, to put them on the table and deal with them constructively, not to shy away, because, otherwise, as Freud taught us, it's the return of the repressed at one point or another. And in a way, the repressed has returned, starting even before October 7. Maybe we should note January 4, 2023, with Levin, the Minister of Justice, offering the judicial reform as a starting point for something that it's too easy to talk about, Netanyahu's political needs. It's too easy. It sits on way more complex identity questions of who we are, what does it mean to be a Jewish state, how does it come together with being holding humanist universal values, Western values, and so on and so forth, and what is the way to manage that complexity. October 7 kind of puts oil into the fire, in the sense that once we're there after this shocking event, everyone is still in shock and traumatized by how we were violated as a state, as people, and with that means of kind of aggression that we have received, and it was surfaced that maybe there's time now to recall about what is our vocation from a Jewish perspective, saying that we shouldn't be talking about kind of the democratic aspects of living together with our neighboring Arabs, but rather we have to do whatever we can, as they say, "Akam lo gechash, kem lo go," and there's a calling here for us to really live on our sword and take responsibility for our future, whatever that means. Whatever that means, we see also some harsh things that are being done in present times, and that's that's part of the gap between, again, I would say, the Jewish identity, democratic identity, and needing to find ways to manage both, taking into account that we have a government that does all that it can to raise and surface the more Jewish aspect of the Israeli identity, that makes the turbulence and the friction that we're now seeing in Israel.
Okay, there's a ton to unpack. We're getting some questions already in the chat. I'm going to collect those and try to synthesize them. In the meanwhile, I have two-part question. First is, we're going to talk obviously about social cohesion in this conversation. I may have one understanding or definition of that. You may have another. So I'd ask you to take a moment and define that for us. And the follow-up question is, how does Israel's internal social cohesion, or lack thereof, impact its ability to address the challenges that you just mentioned, like, and I'd love for you to relate to this, like bringing hostages home and developing effective war strategies?
I thank you for taking us down this route, talking about social cohesion, because we could easily go down a different path and talk about the political implications of what I've stated before. And this is where we shouldn't, or at least in our conversation with my specialty as I come in as a person who's trying to help build shared societies, a more cohesive society, a society in which different groups can live together and share common values and foster a sense of unity, sense of belonging. I won't go now into the terminology or the debate between coexistence, which you mentioned before in shared society, but shared society as a concept came in later years, starting late 80s, 90s, Club de Madrid and elsewhere, in which saying we cannot suffice with coexistence, just living side by side, but rather we need a sense of belonging in which we are the shapers of our reality jointly. How do we help everyone feel that they have a say with shaping the identity and the colors of the area in which we live? So that's something for us to look into. And indeed, from my perspective, most importantly is the understanding that we cannot speak of resilience, national resilience, which is another term. Usually, until about 5 or 10 years ago, when people would talk about resilience, they would talk about what the army does and about having more soldiers, more units in the north and on the border, more units down the south, and so on and so forth. Recent years, you hear major army men or major centers that talk about resilience speaking in terms of social cohesion, meaning they came to the understanding that as long as we have fragmentation and gaps and divides that we are unable to manage constructively, then our resilience is in jeopardy. We put our future at risk way beyond the question of how many tanks there are or how big is the army.
So I'm just gonna ask it point blank, Dr. Kuttner. Do you believe, as you've given us an image, hopefully you can imagine it, what social cohesion could look like or feel like? Are you actually suggesting that social cohesion in Israeli society could bring the hostages home or develop a more effective war strategy? And I hope that's a fair question. And if not, please feel free to tell me, but that's what I think is on people's minds.
Social cohesion could at least allow us to have the skills to sit with the difficulties that come with the different takes on the question of hostages. For example, many people who say now we shouldn't rush to bringing back the hostages at this stage because it comes with a price. So many people from the left would cry out and say this is inhumane, this is something that we cannot agree with, and this is something that is illegitimate. And I would like to offer that even if it's not popular to say so, there's so much in the Jewish tradition about sacrifice and so on and so forth that needs to be attended to, need to be listened to. We need to find ways to empathize in the classical term of kind of getting into the shoes of the other, or going into the home of the other and seeing the inner logic that there is over there. I keep on saying there is an inner logic there that we need to be able to attend to. Now, the fact that we empathize with it does not mean that we give up on our assertiveness with regard to advocating for a different perspective, but at least we can see the complexity and we can deal with it in more constructive means. At the moment, it's yes hostages, no hostages in ways that it also drains out in ways that are just not constructive in any way.
I'm going to keep on this point for one more time, and feel free to just push back and say, let's move on. Can you offer an example to all of us that have come to hear you when Israel was close to being socially cohesive, and that closeness of being socially cohesive had an actual impact on Israeli society, on our government? Can you give us an example?
The ethos of the early days of the melting pot of the Israeli society was such that allowed us to feel this sense of strength and a sense of wonder about how successful and what kind of wonder it is what we have achieved in the first 50 years of the country. It was something beyond anyone's imagination and belief in terms of what we could achieve. problems are that once this melting pot is broken, and we understand that even there, it was a bit elusive in the sense that there were voices that were asked to be part of kind of the tribal in-group voices, but did not really allow the tones, the differences to be heard. Then Israel, like in Israel, we go to the other extreme. And there were some postmodern thinkers that in still 90s, 80s said, Israel, no, it's the place where we can see some of the postmodern theories of relativism coming into play in the sense of, breaking down some of these unities that we saw. How did we manage it since? Here is where I think we're not doing such a great job. And here I think there's something in the Israeli ethos, something with our impatience or the stress that we have, or again, the traumatic moments we are in, that does not allow us to sit for a moment with it and try to deal with. I remember I used to ski in Colorado, and I remember a person telling me he used to help hikers in the summer sports, and he told hikers, if you get lost on the mountains, first thing you need to do is to sit down. Don't try to find your way out. First, when you get lost on the mountains, just sit down. We need to be able to do that. Take a deep breath, count to 10. Do something constructive as we count to 10 in terms of seeing the other, taking the other into account so that we can get to a more complex perspective that allows us to embrace the differences. It allows us to embrace the differences and work on finding a third way, a new way, a new narrative that can allow us gently, with compassion to maybe deconstruct some of our narratives. Maybe I should put it in some more simpler terms, to take some of the images and stories that we have about what is right and what is wrong and what should be done, which at many points and many times come out of our anxiety, okay, and say, you know what, I do want to put a bit of a question mark. I do want to look to see 50 grades of shades of gray before I move from black to white.
Yeah.
We're not good at that.
Yeah, when you say we, I think we as the human race are not good at it. I think
Indeed.
the idea of maintaining is extremely challenging. And within that fear, I'm going to go ahead and take a question from our participants here. And they just went real deep here, which is, it relates to Palestinians. And the question is the following: looking beyond the current war, what initial steps could help rebuild dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians? And I love the question only because it forces us to look at concrete steps. So please take us.
Very good. First of all, I would say, again, we need to take a very deep breath and think about things also in long-term perspective. And long-term does not mean 5 years, does not mean even 10 years, maybe generation. And I'm engaged in work with Palestinian colleagues, trying to build a network of professional conflict specialist mediators that will start working firstly on initiatives, each one in their own land, because times are harsh and there's no ripeness at this time. We need to I always say, as a mediator, as a conflict specialist, the notion of ripeness is very important. That's Zartman's work on ripeness. Know when not to push too much when it's too early and you cannot achieve too much. In these times, at these moments, looking into the future, it's about building an infrastructure. What do we need to do in order to build the infrastructure so that in 20, 25 years, we'll see what comes out of it? Now, it's not only 20, 25 years, and we need to also think short term. And I think to try to avoid extremism, try to move away from being the extreme aspects of things. One thing, again, is the Israeli ethos of living on a sword that kind of shuts us down, and which is the biblical notion of thou shalt live alone, and I'll do my thing for myself. And we're losing the sense of interdependence, which is so important. God, who wants to be interdependent with, our neighbors at this point. This is terrible. But we're also losing interdependence that comes with our European and American friends around the world. We're no longer moving away from being the like-minded countries, being part of the Western ethos of Western countries. And I would say we should ask ourselves, even in the Arab world, there's the Sunni Shia, the divide. Where do we want to be? How do we find those forces that are less radical, less Islamist in nature, and build coalition. And we have very important interests that we share with the Saudis, with other countries. Surprisingly enough, maybe even with Syria and Lebanon, as we see them rising in the last few months. We need.
I want to interrupt you on that because you're giving, I mean, this is exactly where we want to go. We're witnessing, this is you're talking about a regional opportunity here, and you're reframing interdependence in a very encouraging way, hopeful way, where I don't feel that Israel's especially leans into interdependence. So here's the question. When you look at the weakened position of Hezbollah in Lebanon, when you look at the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria and discussions about Israeli-Saudi normalization, how do you believe that Israel might better position itself to engage in these regional dynamics / interdependence?
Read the cues. See the signs on the wall. Even in our own families, you gave it as an example. In the moments then we're kind of closing within ourselves, we're unable to be sensitive to what's going on with our family members and our friends, especially when it's about countries that are out there and that we're quite suspicious towards. And I think that the cues and the signs in recent months are such that there are such geopolitical changes that we should maybe reassess our relations with such countries, see how these coalitions can be formed with the Saudis, obviously with the help of the Americans and European countries and the Abraham Accords, which already in a way plant the seeds for that kind of complex coalition. And with that coalition, one thing in common is fighting the extremism of Islam that we are somewhat fearful from. Now, Iran has lost its major forces, the Islamistic forces in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Hamas being abolished now. So dramatic changes. Lebanon is looking into a new future. Syria is definitely already moving in that direction. How do we extend our hands? How do we give it a shot? We start negotiation theory and practice 1.0 with game theory exercises that help people see the difference between collaboration and adversity, competition.
Yeah.
What is needed in order to shift the mindset from competition, from adversity, to something that gives a chance to collaboration for integrative ways of working with our neighbors? Give a chance does not mean that we shy away from, our forces, but rather gradually trying to move in a new direction with new dynamics, building trust in ways that hopefully will allow us to move and see a new reality here in the Middle East. I believe it is possible.
Dr. Kuttner, how do you deal with at least for me as an Israeli, this critique that's in my mind right now, which is, oh, Dr. Kuttner, you're so naive.
Yeah.
You're so naive.
I know.
What do you do with that?
I had a 3-hour mediation session today. People told me in the beginning, you're so naive. I know, I hear it all the time. Part of my role is to be with people and embrace the moment and allow them. That's the proficiency. And again, I liked so much what you said in the introduction. It's not just about theory-based work. What the promising thing in conflict resolution as a field and as a discipline, that it develops so many fantastic practices to help people move in the right direction. Negotiation can be taught, conflict engagement and constructive conflict management can be taught. What we need to see is more and more people that have the skills and capacity that understand conflict, see the barriers, and help people move beyond these barriers to gradually build trust. It's not that we need to become friends and hug each other and sing together Imagine after 10 minutes. I'm not there. I don't expect that, not even at the end of the road. On the contrary, I'm into surfacing the conflicts. I'm into saying they're there all the time. We should embrace them, but be smart enough to see them early on. So, the saying goes, a wise person knows how not to fall into a hole that a smart person knows how to come out of. So we keep falling into certain holes because we push away the conflicts that we feel that we don't have what it takes to manage them constructively. I'm saying no. There are ways to manage them constructively and gradually build a roadmap that will get us there. I was the academic advisor of Givat Chaviva, one of the largest organizations that does Jewish Arab work in Israel, shared society work. Okay, we worked among Jewish and Arab municipalities in Wadi Ara, one of the more sensitive areas in Israel. So we had a 4-year project telling them 4 years, that's what you have politically, but it's only the beginning. And after 4 years, we'll be in a different place in terms of seeing the possibilities that we're unable to see at the beginning. We need to be patient. We need to take time. And we also have to be persistent. That kind of persistence does not come together with, oh gosh, this is so naive.
Yeah. I would just add one of the pieces. I think we need to be brave. That seems to be courage is required. So we've done some theory, we've done some practice, we've kind of hovered around some 30,000 feet, and I'd like to take a dive into the university for a moment. And I also want to let those that are with us know that we'll be opening up. I've received dozens of questions, and I'm holding back. This will be kind of the last direction I'd like to offer you, and then we'll let our friends guide us through the rest of the conversation. And I want to talk about the University of Haifa, obviously, the demographics of the student body, literally the location of the university, at least our Mount Carmel campus that's perched on top of the Mount Carmel Ridge, surrounded by villages and smaller towns of different faiths and backgrounds. The way I experience the University of Haifa is a university that is indeed one of the most diverse student populations in the country.
Yeah.
How does this position the university, if at all, but if it does, how does this position the university to develop the next generation of the conflict transformation specialists?
For sure it does. Bar Ilan University is a university that, in a way, sees its vocation in terms of Jewish studies and so on and so forth. And students that come to the University of Bar Ilan, they know that they need to undergo certain studies that have to do with Jewish studies. That's okay. That's just okay. University of Haifa is a university that, because of the demographics, is a university that can be, in a way, a leader in Israeli academia. We're saying we're putting shared society and we're putting conflict transformation as vocation and goals, understanding, again, as I said before, that these are questions of national resilience. We want everyone to feel at home. I'm currently conducting a research at the University of Haifa, working and asking Arab and Jewish students, do they feel at home? Certain aspects, 25 questions of breaking down what feeling at home means, trying to help us see within the University of Haifa. It is sponsored by the university itself because the university is interested with seeing and understanding what it is that we're doing good, what it is that we're lacking and we need to improve. And I'm really happy and excited about what we do at the University of Haifa. As you mentioned at the beginning, so many centers and initiatives that are doing related aspects to shared society, of conflict transformation. And because who we are, I think we can be leaders with offering the kind of teaching and the kind of research. And again, I don't want to go into just research, but teaching, because again, it's the practical aspects of things.
Applied,
and applied, 100%. This is something that I thank for my time at Harvard, in the sense that, at Harvard, they feel comfortable going to the practical aspects without feeling bad about, I'm not just writing another paper and now there will be the top paper in referee journal, but rather, how do I write these manuals and how do I reach out to the people on the ground to make a difference? Luckily, we have a program. It's an international program where we have students coming from Africa, coming from Ukraine, coming from Kosovo. I'm flying out on Sunday to Kosovo to see. I was asked to check for the possibilities of developing shared society among Albanians and Serbs in northern Kosovo, and it's a derivation of the work that we do with students at the university. So here's an example of how we can help and how we are helping around the world. People in Africa that go back to their African countries, Liberia, Nigeria, and other countries, they seek advice to help them start mediation centers, community mediation centers, and to do peace-building initiatives. So that's great, and I hope we'll continue to do that around the world. Well, we still need to do more in the sense of teaching, because our teaching currently is just in English for outside. Rather, how do we develop the next generation of Israeli-minded and professional practitioners, being the next generation of conflict specialists, to deal on exactly these issues?
Okay. All right. So you've given us a response that is kind of cradled within our university, and I'm very curious, and I and others are curious about mixing what you just said with interdependence, and I'm talking about academic interdependence, and specifically in the Middle East. So here's the question. Are there any other universities that you are aware of in the Middle East that engage in similar efforts to promote peaceful coexistence and understanding? If so, how could University of Haifa work with them?
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, whoever that was. Thank you.
Yeah. I believe you mean outside of Israel. Because in Israel,
Middle East, outside of Israel.
Outside of Israel, I was part of an initiative that we got a nice grant from the Ministry of Regional Affairs in Israel, but from the previous government, in which we came together with countries in the area to work on developing together concepts and understanding of shared society to implement in these countries. Now, unfortunately, when I talk about countries in the region, we had Morocco, but we have Bulgaria, we have North Macedonia. We didn't have Jordan, we didn't have the PA, we didn't have Egypt, we didn't have Lebanon. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. I did have conversations with people in Jordan and again, as I told you, I'm working with someone from Palestinian Authority, working together, but I don't know if I can say under the radar when this is somewhat recorded, but it's not an official work that is done within the university in Nablus or in Bethlehem. And this is part of the hopes and aspirations of building that kind of collaborations that we're still not there. We need to do more of that. And I believe that part of the strategy moving in the right direction is working together, as we have done in that initiative that I mentioned already before, on developing concepts, but not only concept practices for implementation in regional countries to develop shared society.
Beautiful. And that, by the way, that question was from Bob Markey. So thank you, Bob. Another question here that relates to the different generations in Israel and different perhaps behaviors or patterns that are, in your opinion, moving us closer to social cohesion or not. So the question is the following. How do you see the role of young Israelis in the healing process? Are you seeing, Dr. Kuttner, different attitudes or approaches among students as compared to older generations?
This is where I'm trying to bring my optimism here, and this is a question that puts me in a place of wonder. I have questions. I'm not sure that I have answers per se, but I must say that when you look at the activism outside in the streets of kind of seeking change, it's not the youth, it's not the youngsters, it's not like France in the late 60s, it's not the younger generation that is fiercely fighting for a better future. That has to do with one side of the realm. On the other side, I see more extremism. I see more and more people already born into an entire generation of, post-Oslo times, where there's some sort of disparity about the potential of having moving forward towards peace. And it's a shame. Peace is a word that is not used a lot lately, and it's something that most people have major disbelief towards. Martin Buber said early in the middle of the 20th century, I think early in the 20th century, when writing I and Thou, he said, the mal de siècle, the crisis of the 20th century, is its inability to even give room of faith in dialogue. Dialogue, as he understood it, the I and Thou, is kind of the deep kind of meaning of seeing the other and co-constructing reality with the others. And I think that this crisis is only becoming bigger as we are pursuing the moving deeply into the 21st century. And I need to bring hope. We need to bring new possibilities that, again, as I told you, in the beginning of the mediation session, people don't see the potential and the possibilities. Part of my role is to help people see the possibilities. And again, we have practices that can help do that. And we need to help people see, you know what, there's a crack from which the light can come in. And it's a huge issue. I admit it's a huge issue. When we see the younger generation now, there's a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah. So the polarization is intergenerational.
Yeah.
That's depressing.
Yeah.
But that's why you're here, to give us that mirror. A lot of the questions that are coming in right now relate to the tachlis nature of what it is that you do. So I'm going to give you a few questions, and you can kind of field them.
Sure.
One is, how do you measure success in conflict transformation work? What does progress look like when you're working with communities that have such fundamentally different views, worldviews? And another similar related question is, how can Israelis act now to try to reduce internal tensions? Now, I know you've mentioned this, but for some reason, these questions are still coming up.
Yeah.
So maybe you can dig deeper on that, in that area.
Yeah. Again, success is gradual. Success is timely, and we need to also have the right amount of expectations if we really want to see long-term transformation. So at the beginning, it's about answering a very simple question: why it would benefit me on the most concrete, interest-based level? Why it would benefit me to work with the other? When we bring in Jewish and Arab municipalities together, they want to see results. They want to see that by working together, 1 + 1 gets to 2.5, not just 2. There's an added value there of working together in terms of raising more funds, in terms of being able to work on joint projects that can lead to concrete changes and so on and so forth. And they see that, and they're able to see that. Then they're able, very, very concrete measures. It's not like a narrative approach in which let's sit and talk and deconstruct our narratives now and so on and so forth. That's highly important, but again, ripeness. When do you engage in these kind of conversations? Then I would say the second level is to say, how do I take into account what the other side is saying in ways that I wasn't aware of before? This is where I would see some of the Jewish municipalities saying, so you are really moving beyond coexistence, meaning we need to see some sort of equality in the decision-making processes. We're not really there. What does that mean, equality? All of a sudden I feel a bit uncomfortable. Okay, so we have an industrial park. They don't have an industrial park. They don't have land for industrial park in Arab communities. Then it means that you have less of an income to the Arab communities. Okay. Now what do I do with it? I go to sleep with it. Then the other day I had, head of the economical unit in one of the very rich Jewish municipality coming to his Arab neighbors and saying, now we're about to call in for a joint industrial park on lands that are on the Jewish lands, because only the Jewish municipalities will have these areas where you can start it, but it will be a joint project and income will be divided. I had the Arabs looking at each other, then looking at me, and then for 2 weeks asking me, where do we call on the bluff? Meaning, we're not used to hearing that kind of tone of voice. So, but then, that's a gradual movement towards understanding, that there are things that can be done together where you can get to a win-win in terms of understanding. Also, you cannot leave minorities or some of the populations in the Israeli society behind if you're concerned about the economy and the GDP of your country. It just doesn't work this way. So there's a gradual process that needs to take place, and it can take place because when people work together, maybe they won't tell you at first, but they sleep better at night. They sleep better at night. And then gradually they'll be able to stand in front of the mirror and say, you know what? I wish we could do that. No, we're too naive, Dr. Kuttner. You're too naive. Yeah. No, but you see gradual successes, and it's about wellness. It's about well-being. And that's how it works.
It's hard to be able to see well-being when you're completely engulfed in a
Indeed.
conflict. It
Indeed.
seems to be all over the place. I have two more questions, or I'm representing two more questions, and then I'd like to wrap us up. I would also like to remind everyone that is with us that there is a series of conversations that we are surfacing, and we encourage you to continue. And if this is something that you want to dig deeper on, then we'll hold another call with Dr. Kuttner and possibly others. So this is an interesting one. It's slightly provocative. Here's the question, have we Jews lost our Jewish legitimacy to exist as a separate entity within our own state in the Middle East?
It's a complex question because it's about legitimacy and it's about separate entity. They don't necessarily go hand in hand together, but we are definitely losing our legitimacy and our moral stance. Again, I used the term before, like-minded countries, and it's a term that was meant to embrace also the Israeli society as being part of the Western humanistic, universalistic perspective, where you could see that this ethos is an ethos that European and American countries would stand behind. Well, we are currently at a place that some countries are questioning it, and this is detrimental. Not only some countries, also within. We see some issues with regard to the ethical considerations within Israeli society. And again, I'm looking at it in the eye. Why? Because in the name of some Jewish ethos that does not seek the democratic aspects of things, I see where they come from. And how would I say? I must give it a room in the larger considerations. Pushing it back, fighting it, is not the way to try and find a way to manage it more constructively. Again, by being able to move to more collaborative stances, I think that we need to recover our ethos, our reputation among the world, and again, building the kind of alliances that will serve eventually a very proud Jewish and democratic state. Again, independent, I'm not sure what does that mean. Some of my Arab colleagues and friends say you now call for democracy since 2023, but it was never really a democracy with regard to the relations or the Arab minorities' rights. So these are complex questions to deal with as well. I believe it is possible to have a more complex identity where I do feel the sense of being proud as a Zionist. I'm a proud Zionist. I'm a proud Jew. And at the same time, I can bring my humanistic values and universalistic values in ways where everyone can feel at home. And this will still be a home for the Jewish people in Israel.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I answered it.
I'm not sure necessarily. I'm sure there is more than one answer. That's for sure. And you've offered an interesting perspective. The last question, and then we're going to wrap up. It relates to, we have seen probably since the establishment of the State of Israel, but definitely in the past several years, and specifically since the war started on October 7th, 2023, is the place of international intervention. And the question that has now been raised from different people that are joining us today relates to the Jewish diaspora. And specifically the potential role of Jews in the diaspora, in engaging, contributing, supporting the work specifically that you do. This work, do you see a bridge? Do you see an opportunity? Is there relevance to that relationship?
I think yes. And I think yes, because again, the Jewish diaspora coming from these countries where some of these values of inclusivity, of shared living, of diversity and cultural diversity and so on and so forth, collaborative mindsets and so on, these are things that are part of the ethos it's part of the day-to-day life in these countries. Again, once we understand that this is one of the major problems that we're suffering now in Israel, then this is where we need to invest. meaning that if we really want to kind of put our efforts on what it is that can help and lead to transformation within the Israeli society, if we understand that the notions of cohesion and shared society are the things that need to be worked on, I believe that working together, getting the support, getting the help, getting the reassurance that we need from our, family and friends and colleagues and Jews around the world should make us feel that we're not alone, because again, part of the anxiety is that we're kind of left alone and again, no independence, and B, that we can bring these forces and these values to show us how it works in other places in ways that should be implemented in Israel. So to be more concrete about it, I think that what Israel is still lacking, unfortunately, is undergraduate studies in conflict resolution, peace building. I want to see youth, youngsters coming out of the army saying, I want to invest in that. Yes, I want to go and study philosophy or history and political science, but I want to study together with something practical that can have a contribution on these areas. So unlike the more theoretical disciplines of history, philosophy, political science, and so on, or international relations, we can have studies in which we will develop efficiency, and that hopefully, my hope is that in 20, 30 years' time, people will say, yes, there is such professionals, conflict specialists we can make use of. When people were talking about psychotherapists in the 50s, 70 years ago, people didn't understand what that is. It was just an emerging discipline. Okay. Nowadays, it's quite established as a discipline that people know if I seek help, if I have issues, inner conflict, I can go and seek help. Okay. There are professionals to help us do that. I want people and communities and organizations to know that when they seek help, they're able to put the finger on a problem, designate a problem, say, I want to seek help. Okay. I got a phone call a few days ago from an attorney that came to me to a mediation from court 2 weeks before that, saying, I have a client that has an issue with another guy. How about if we come to you before we file charges? I said, I applaud you. This is what we want. Don't go to court first. Don't blow at each other and then come to mediation. Same thing here. People need to be able to make use of professionals on a daily basis for the wellness of our country. My hope that Haifa will be a leader with developing the first generation of professionals, of youngsters that are going to invest in undergraduate studies that will lead them to hold the proficiency to develop shared societies and so on.
Those are unplanned, beautiful concluding remarks that leave us really with hope in the sense that academia could actually lift us up to a new place.
Yes.
So I want to thank you, Dr. Kuttner, for this fascinating and really important discussion about rebuilding Israel's social fabric in these challenging times. Your insights into practical approaches for healing divisions and fostering dialogue, they offer us hope for a unified future. And I just want to say we need it today more than ever. And of course,
I hope this was encouraging for everyone as well. I hope that it does encourage.
As you noted, it's a journey, and so some may be feeling encouraged, and some may be feeling discouraged. But hopefully, they're on the path. And those that are with us right now, thank you for joining today's webinar, for engaging the way you have. My cell phone is blown up with messages. We apologize for any questions that we were not able to get to during the session, but if you have any further queries following this webinar, please send them to the following email address: info@afuh.org. That's info@American Friends of University of Haifa, info@afuh.org. The work of peace and conflict management has never been more important, and the University of Haifa remains committed to leading these efforts through research, through education, and community engagement. And through programs like the ones that Dr. Kuttner mentioned, International Graduate Program in Peace and Conflict Management Studies. You heard a pitch for undergraduate studies to get people on the track. We will continue to train the next generation of leaders who can bridge divides and build stronger, more cohesive communities. Thank you once again for your participation, for your support, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next American Friends of University of Haifa webinar.